Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros conversation around a pretty exciting and interesting way to think about forecasting. And it's really looking at it through the lens of value per meeting. Our session today is sponsored by the team at Kronologic, and really excited to have Scott Logan, VP of Marketing at Kronologic, joining us here today. And Scott, it's been a while since we've had you on, and I don't think you've been on MSP since you've joined Kronologic.
I've been on a few things, definitely supported some speakers, but yeah, it's been a bit since the summer started. So yeah, thanks for having me back.
And Scott, in a weird twist, I think Scott is the only like 5-time sponsor of MSP in his journey through all the different avenues of sales tech. But Scott, one of the traditions we have on Modern Sales, we love to learn a little bit more about the guests before we jump into the content. So, and this is a surprise to me. Scott's hyped it up quite a bit, but Scott, where is the travel destination you are most excited to head to in the next half of the year?
So it would be a fishing trip to Alaska for 5 days, going for both salmon and halibut, 4 days of salmon, 1 day of halibut, with my brother-in-law. And my wife reminds me every day that she should be the one going on the trip, not me. It's her brother. But you know, who wants to bring their sister on a boys fishing trip? So I got the nod for it, and I'm very excited to do that.
That'll be good. What is it? What, coho or sockeye? What kind of salmon is it going to
be? Last time we went for reds, so I'm guessing we'll hit the early part of the red season, and you know, when you go for halibut, you just try and get the biggest one you can get.
Yeah. Great. Well, we'll have a barbecue at Scott's house when we'll talk about value per meeting too. This is exciting. Well, folks, we got a lot to cover here today, so we're going to jump right into it. Before we get started here, just a word from our founder, Pete Kazanjic. Pete, kick us off.
Hi, I'm Pete Kazanjic, founder of Modern Sales Pros and Atrium. Atrium is a data-driven sales management platform that helps managers use data to improve team and rep performance. It takes less than 90 seconds to get started. Just log in with your Salesforce credentials and Atrium will show you how your reps are performing across hundreds of metrics. Sign up for a free account now at signup.atriumhq.com. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this event.
And thank you, Pete.
Hi, I'm Kazanjic.
For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Our mission is to create an environment for our members where they can answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own, or see around corners that maybe they don't know are coming up. Everything we do is free for our members. And for those of you who aren't, you'll be invited to join afterwards, and we certainly hope that you will. Today's session is sponsored by the team at Kronologic. We've worked with Kronologic pretty much from the inception of their organization. They've been an incredibly important part of Modern Sales Pros growth, both over the past year virtually, but prior to that as well. They were one of the founding organizations that helped MSP get off the ground in Austin, Texas. So it's been really exciting to see their growth as an organization and see great people join them, I should say. But Scott, just a few words about Kronologic.
Yeah, so Kronologic, we turn time into value is our tagline. And our guarantee is that we're the single highest ROI RevTech investment that you will make. And it's because we automate the sending of the calendar invite using a calendar first methodology for driving much more of your pipeline faster and making life easier for your reps and your buyers.
And check it out. It's some really exciting stuff. Every time that I chat with customers of Kronologic, they talk about that ROI point, and it's mind-boggling, some of the numbers you hear. It almost doesn't sound real. But we're really excited to be having this conversation today. This is something that's near and dear to, I think, many of our hearts, forecasting, and really thinking about some new and sophisticated ways to approach forecasting, or dare I say, maybe even easier or accurate ways to think about forecasting. And we're excited here to be joined by Scott Logan, as I had mentioned at the outset. But Scott, probably worth it to introduce yourself to the MSP community that you're going to take salmon fishing with you, because we're your favorite community for fishing.
Yeah, you're all welcome. I don't know exactly where we'll be, but somewhere on the Russian River. So my little bit about me, I've been in the sales engagement space for the last 4+ years. I've built demand gen teams and rebuilt demand gen teams at both Xant and Ring DNA. And before that, led demand gen in the contact center software space. So I've been involved on the customer side of software and the sales side of software for 10 plus years, and then did sales before that. So basically, I've dedicated my career to this, and it's a big passion of mine.
Exciting to have Scott join us as well, because he's got perspective from all of those different areas as well. But Scott, let's talk value per meeting. Like let's jump into it.
Awesome. Go ahead and share my screen. So value per meeting, the forecasting metric you need. Obviously, we know that the meeting, the discovery call, the demo call is where it all begins. And so we focus everything we do around just that. And what we found through a lot of hard work from our CRO and co-founder, Aaron Bollinger, is that you can actually forecast much more accurately with it. So let's take a look at our world today. Our world today has certain forecasting metrics that are good and bad for many different reasons. Leads. The problem with leads right now, many marketing leaders, thought leaders that you hear out there today are saying, stop tracking those, stop tracking MQLs even. And it's because there's a huge volume difference, because we have so many different lead sources that have so many different campaign variances, that maybe an ABM campaign that has 100 companies in it and 200 or 400 people is going to produce more volume of opportunities than, say, content downloads. But if we're just chasing a lead number, that's not always going to translate into the revenue in the pipeline that we need. Sales activity and calls, it's the same type of thing. Results vary. Some sales reps are really good at email. Some sales reps are really good at the phone conversations. Some sales reps have their own unique ways of getting in touch with people. And if you're just tracking one metric, that's not always the best for everyone. And movement does not always equal work. So a lot of those can be very misleading as well. Deals and opportunities, something that all of us on the marketing and sales side track, and we absolutely should track. But we'll get into it later. There are a lot of misalignments from the marketing team to the SDR team, if you have one, and the sales team on when new deals get action and when is the best time to actually push those through. And then pipeline is almost always a lagging indicator, though it can be a leading indicator for revenue. It actually doesn't help you very much in the first half of the funnel, because it just takes too long for it to be accurate. You can set an amount based on average deal volume or deal, and that is helpful, and we use that as well. But it should have some context with it, and you should have some better metrics leading into it. So
one point to add just on that leads point, I think this is really interesting. I think a lot of folks would look at HubSpot as, oh, they've got this figured out, Scott. They've got the math figured out. And there's actually an expression that they use on the SDR team at HubSpot, and that they use it on the AE team as well. It's what you get is what you get. And what they're saying with that is, hey, we're going to do our best to make it fair and equitable across everybody, but sometimes the leads you get are going to be the Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross leads, and sometimes they're going to be the bad leads. And this is HubSpot. This is a massive inbound business here. So I just wanted to put that fine point on this, where like, even for an organization as big and well known as HubSpot, it's what you get is what you get from a leads perspective.
Yeah, and that's that if I was a salesperson on the line, I'd be like, well, step it up, marketing team. And I agree, step it up. If that's your excuse, is what you get is what you get, then you need some alignment there. So yeah, but it is that just stresses the point that it's a problem that everybody has.
Yeah.
And when these metrics don't get hit or aren't met, there's some challenges. In each role, there's challenges, and they cascade to exaggerate the problem even more. So we don't hit a revenue number or a pipeline number or an opportunity number. Well, what's marketing do? Let's borrow some pipeline from, or some budget from further down in the year and spend more money, drive more leads. But then we end up pushing more leads to the SDRs, and they're probably already maxed out on the to-do list. Like 1 lead equals 10 call, email, task, to-do lists. So you're going to say you already are barely keeping up with the 10,000 tasks I've given you for the last 1,000 leads. But this next go around, we're going to give you 2. So now you have 20,000 tasks to follow. Well, what happens? Let's roll to the next one. More sales activities, slower response time, not as many touch points per lead because they're trying to keep up with their SLAs. So how do they keep up with their SLAs? They qualify quicker in order to burn through those activities faster. And now they're spending less time on the phone or talking to them, and they have to qualify that quicker. And their number just went up because marketing's number went up. So now they're putting through stuff that's like maybe it's pretty good. I have a good argument as to why it's a stage 0 or a stage 1 up. Well, the quality drops. And then what happens on the sales side, you have marketing that is sending more leads, and you have SDRs that are sending more of the opportunities. So now you have this great funnel of net new deals coming through. Maybe the quality is a little bit lower. What does sales do? Well, they got to hit their number. So since they have to hit their number, they're thinking, well, I have a handful of late stage deals now that I have to close at higher than 20%. So I'm going to focus on closing 30 or 40% of those by focusing there. I have some close loss deals that I can bring back to life from 6 months ago. I can do some customer expansion deals. That's my low hanging fruit to hit my number. But then you have this other flow building things up. I don't know if you've experienced that or not, Richard.
I think I've lived that from a bunch of different angles. And I like, we joke around about this a little bit, but Scott, I'm sure you've been in those executive meetings where the sales leader is like, yeah, look, the leads that we got were bad, but the team that we have is heroic and we did amazing work, and sales leader takes a victory lap. And then the other part of this is you move further down the flywheel, right? You've got customer success going. Like, I don't know what sales just closed. We got a bunch of superheroes over here doing it. I think the part that you've probably lived before too is this just volume mentality from marketing, and just saying, hey, look, we're just going to put a bunch of stuff in the top of the funnel, and sheer large numbers are going to make the rest of it work. And that works to a point, but there's definitely some challenges there that I think you're going to dive into here, but you can also have experienced at different points in time.
Yeah. I mean, Richard, how many times have you heard it's just a numbers game from both sides?
My favorite is the idea that marketing has moved from madmen to math men. And I think there's some truth to that. Marketing is much more data driven than it was in the Don Draper days. But that doesn't just mean the bigger number is better. I know, right? Groundbreaking. It's like sometimes quality over quantity is an important thing.
Yeah, there's been some scenarios in my career where I've heard that it's a numbers game, and we use these conversion rates because they're proven over the last 5, 8, 10, 15 years. And I'm like, wait a minute. If we do that, we have to spend more money, and it's going to make all sorts of problems for the sales teams. Let's concentrate on the conversion rates.
Yeah.
Let's convert each stage 1% higher. Let's convert each stage 2% higher. And then what happens? Because addressing this slide here, at the executive level, the C-suite, they think everything's great because marketing generated more leads. Awesome, more MQLs. This is fantastic. I gave you more money. You gave me more MQLs. CMO sits down from their board slides and everyone, yay. SDR leader comes up and, hey, we created more deals. There's more opportunities in the pipeline than has ever been before. This is fantastic. What a great ROI. Don't quite know the pipeline. We use some stuff. We don't, the deals aren't progressing. Let's not talk about that. Let's just say, hey, more opportunities. Fantastic. And then the sales team comes up and is, the one that has the most clout in the room. Obviously, they close the deals. Their team is bringing in the revenue, and they're like, we've closed more revenue than we've ever closed before. That was great. That sprint, that last quarter, you put us under the gun. We delivered. All 3 teams are a success. We walk away. People get their bonuses. Things are fantastic. Now,
I feel great about that scenario as the CRO or the CMO of this proverbial company.
Board members. Yeah, exactly. And then you walk away, and 6 months later, you think, where's the ROI on that spend? Because now that I peek under the hood, I see deals that were in progress closing, more expansion deals, and I don't see lead sources from campaigns on these opportunities in our CRM. That's interesting. Well, then let's go back to the SDRs, and you think, wow, that's odd. And when you look under the hood of the marketing, you're like, okay, so those two teams are aligned, but that doesn't align to sales. And because sales can make their number without marketing and without the SDRs, and you have some winners within that world, but the whole process can be completely broken if you don't have efficient systems and you don't have accurate forecasting.
And I think the part here too that's interesting, and Scott, the activities point on the per lead, I think it's worth it to break that down a little bit just for the audience, because I think I was first taken aback by that. I was like, that feels like what the heck? And Scott, you want to share a little bit of the data behind that?
Yeah, so on the side of the SDR's activities, the better you are at being creative in the sales cycle, the better activities or in that SDR process, the higher the conversion rates you're going to have. However, you can't just go off of those metrics. You should really focus on the end result of those metrics. So we've had a person on my SDR team before who just could not talk on the phone. It's not that he couldn't talk on the phone, otherwise he wouldn't have an SDR job. It's just that they got into life issues with him. And, you know, he was a career SDR and fantastic at it. And his call length would be 20 minutes. I don't want my SDR to be connecting with someone for 20 minutes on a call. That is great for rapport building. People love him. I go to a trade show or an event that I would run, and they'd say, how's Ron doing? Like, the SDR that got you here, how's he? I know his kid's going through this, like, you know, thing at school, and like, love him to death, but it's not efficient. And so you need to, but his call metrics are great. So you need to kind of like adapt to the SDR and their successes and work there to work their craft and get it better. But you need to measure off of that end result, measure off of what you're looking for them as a leading indicator, which is actually that meeting. Same goes for marketing, the ABM campaigns versus content campaigns. I don't care how many leads come in from that lead source, as long as I'm still getting the ROI from that investment and a conversion rate that makes sense to supply the amount of discovery calls that can supply the amount of pipeline that I need.
And I love what we're about to get into here. And the other part I would highlight here is just the sheer volume standpoint of this. These aren't numbers that Scott's making up here. Depending on which resources you look at from a best practice standpoint, I think it's somewhere between 9 and 23 touches is what it takes to take and convert a lead to an actual live meeting. So thinking about, if I double my lead volume, that's a pretty big commit that we're looking for. The pretty big commit that we're looking for here from the team.
Yeah, what we really explained here is what we call the last mile problem, which is that disconnect and the failure to convert most leads, whether they're marketing or sales sourced, into actual sales appointments, which lead to revenue. And so you can watch one of our past webinars to talk about how the calendar first methodology can do that and can turn that prospecting process into a more streamlined process where marketing can deliver an actual accepted meeting and the sales reps can focus on the discovery call instead of focusing on the actual lead chasing. But once you get to that point and you've increased your conversion rates, maybe you're using calendar first methodology that we prescribe, and you're actually getting the meetings you want at the volume you want, doubling your conversion rates. Now, then, or even now with your own current world, you can still forecast better off of the meeting. So let's transition to that right now. Yeah. Why an accepted meeting? Why am I so focused on it outside of we help you book meetings? Well, this is what Richard said. You need to call this out. This was a regular bullet point, but he called this out. Your only leading indicator that's validated by your buyers is an accepted meeting. Richard, what was the emotion that came across when
Yeah,
you went
it's
over
something
this?
like Jeff Mitchell just actually asked this question. He says, hey, well, what if that SDR is gathering more beneficial information on a 20-minute call than an 8-minute call? You know where that's going to show up? An accepted meeting. And this is great. And there's a lot of value that Scott's going to unpack here. But ultimately, this is in a weird way, this is where a lot of the rubber hits the road.
Mm-hmm.
Customer can be interested. They can feel really good. I just got off that qualification call and it felt like Scott was really my guy. Did he accept the meeting? Or did you just chat about your kids for a while? The other part that I found for me, having a background first running solutions engineering teams before moving into running revenue organizations, this is a really interesting metric because it's also something when you think about how much time you have in the day and how you scale your organizations, thinking through, especially with more junior AE and SDR teams, you're thinking about how many units of time do we have? How long can they stay focused on? But ultimately, this is the thing that we're driving for in the early part of the funnel, which is where it was like, maybe there's a lot of smart people in MSP, and that's probably obvious to some people. But for me, I was like, holy moly, I'd never thought of that before.
Yeah, I mean, let's unpack that. Your MQL is a set of criteria set between the marketing and sales leaders. Has nothing to do with the buyer and their intent. The intent score from an ABM platform, staying in marketing, is based on their activity with content online. Extremely valuable, but it still doesn't validate intent with your company. On the sales side, what constitute an opportunity to be created in your CRM? Who sets that? Well, it's a virtual agreement between a set of criteria. Pipeline, a virtual agreement between your licenses or however you charge based on average deal size or whatever. That's fine. It's great. You need that, but it's not validated by anyone but yourself. You don't know how much they're willing to spend really until you get down to red lines. So this is the only component when they accept your meeting that you know that the marketing worked, the conversation with your SDR worked, that your messaging, your solution, your targeting, that it validates everything that you have done up to that point by your buyer. They accepted the meeting. And that's why we like it so much as a leading indicator.
Yeah, one other point on this too, Scott. For those of you who attended Tiffany Bova from Salesforce, we had her on for a fireside chat a month and a half ago. This also lines up with something that she said, which I think is really prescient. Like, Scott, I don't wake up in the morning and say, man, today's the day I'm gonna be a stage 4 opportunity. You don't, right? What do? The only thing that you do is you accept a meeting and have that conversation. So it's a good buyer-centric way. It's probably the best buyer-centric way because they're literally investing their time.
Yep. And there are some characteristics of that meeting that make it powerful. It's not just an accepted meeting. Okay, great, they have intent. There's a lot of meat on that bone. So, for instance, the date stamp of when the meeting is. I actually, just to be fully transparent, learned a lot of these tactics 2 jobs ago prior to here and have carried them through. And then when I saw Kronologic has them built out, I'll show you a dashboard later, I was awestruck that it actually came to life outside of me jerry-rigging a Salesforce report. But if you track the date that the meetings are set and accepted for in your, maybe it's a stage 0 or in an event activity in your Salesforce CRM or wherever, you can then forecast out and see into the future how many meetings are booked 1, 2, 3 weeks out. And then when you know your conversion rates of those meetings into opportunities, you now know how to turn the dial. You know how well you're doing well before the end of the quarter. What more before the end of the quarter than you've ever seen before. And that can span across different personas. We'll get into that later as well. I would start your funnel with the meeting, like tracking it. Like when you report to even your internal leadership team, like that middle circle where your internal leaders get exposure to it, not the board level, you see everything starting at that meeting point. Because people will get, outside of your department, will get so focused on your lead volume, your MQL volume, how many people are even at that trade show, That stuff doesn't matter as long as you're delivering the discovery calls needed that can provide you the volume of meetings that you need. Everything that with all those variables leads down to the one thing that has no variables as its in its core is that accepted meeting, because your buyer said, I want a discovery call. Let's talk shop. It's fantastic in that role. Other technologies have centered around that. Call analytics. They're not analyzing your email reports. I mean, that's an old school metric that you should look at for subject lines and stuff, but they want to know what's happening on that call, in that meeting. You know, a passive link-based scheduler, Calendly's made an amazing valuation recently for those people who are just heat-seeking right straight to your page that they want to book a call with. We take more of an outbound approach, but that's whole industry, which every platform has replicated that link-based scheduler because everyone cares about the meeting. We care about it as well. And the most important thing in my mind is this. It's the one metric that aligns sales and marketing in the top of the funnel. So get this, from just tracking this meeting and the date of the meeting so that you can see into the future, you get what was its lead source and what was its campaign path. What team was it on? Was it booked from and booked for? What rep was it? Which persona is in that meeting? Maybe you're marketing to 5 personas. Now you can look at that meeting, see who's in that meeting, and now you can track how many which personas are actually having meetings, and now you can adjust spend based on that. Which products, if you have multiple SKUs, which industries, if you aren't quite sure about industry or not, all that's there within the world of that meeting and where it's stored in your CRM. And that information is equally valuable for marketing as it is for sales. We'll go for it.
No, I was going to say, and the other part that this is valuable for too is literally back to what we were saying before on that capacity planning front, right? If we needed to, what's that old adage that, like you're saying, Scott, it's a numbers game. All right, well, I'm just going to hire more SDRs, right? You get this mythical person month or this mythical person pipeline. And it's like, well, maybe you need that. Maybe you need more efficiency here. Sorry, Scott, to jump in there.
Yeah, no, go for it. And then are those deals multi-threaded? Well, let's look at the CRM, see if people added contacts to the opportunity. Well, there's 3 contacts on the opportunity, or maybe there's 20 contacts on the opportunity, and they all have roles. Well, who's actually in those engagements? Now you got to look at all the activity records.
Yeah.
Stop it. Who's in the meeting? That's your multi-threaded source of truth. Who's attending those meetings? That's how multi-threaded you are. Track the meeting. Which of those personas are engaged? Maybe you have to have an IT director or a security director or the operations person, but they're not your entry point. But you know that you close deals more when they're engaged early. Well, now you can track that. Before, it's just talking to reps one-on-one and anecdotes. Maybe they just had a call with an ops person on. They're like, yeah, they're always on. You look at the data, they're not on. You caught them on a good day. There's a question over here.
There's a couple good ones in here in the chat panel. Maybe we'll take Larry's first, Scott. I'm assuming you're looking at the same chat panel I am here.
Yep.
Yeah. So Larry's question is just for folks who are following along at home. What's the driver? Is it the date that the meeting is held? Is it when the meeting's scheduled? What do you do about cancellations? What do you do about reschedules and all of that? Yep. Scott, what's your perspective on that?
Very good question. So I would build out either on the opportunity record or on an activity record or somewhere unique that you want to build out for yourself. But it's a place in like an event activity or in maybe just a meeting tracking field or object on the app where you would say, or on the lead where you would say, here's the discovery meeting and when it was accepted. Here's the date, and that's a timestamp. The second timestamp you track is the date that the meeting is scheduled for. You then have a status drop down of scheduled, no-showed, held, and moving forward. You could put whatever status is there that you want to check. I usually would do scheduled, held, rescheduling, no show, and success would be whatever you want to call success. Created op, move to op, whatever. Move to next stage, or just success. And then you can build a report that says how many in the future are scheduled. And then in the past, you can track metrics and percentages based on show, no show rate, how many get stuck and are rescheduled, how many, because that'll tell you like there's still, balls in the hopper or whatever to pull out to drive more business with or whatever. So that's the way I would structure it there. And then you can also take it to the next level if you wanted to do the multi-threaded piece and put a contact sync there where it's a lookup field for the different people who are in that meeting. And now you can include the persona and multi-threadedness into that same. And there's a complementary question there on, is the op created upon the first meeting held? Yes, that would be the ideal scenario. You have a stage 0, which is that discovery call stage, or you could just say stage discovery call, whatever you want to call it. I like using numbers because then when you do funnel reporting, it stays in line and you don't have reporting issues on dashboards. But you would do that then. And then marketing would use that object to report on, and then moving forward. But then when sales pulls their reports, they start with that stage just beyond it, whether that's your stage 0 or your stage 1. So that way sales doesn't include those in their metrics, because you don't want your CRO and your VP of sales to be seeing those numbers. You could just get too much heat.
Right. And that's I think, Scott, we've talked about this in the past, but that's how in previous lives, I know other organizations have run this as well. You've got a stage 0 opportunity, and turns out maybe it's had a great call with Scott. Turns out they're not the right fit for us. We're just going to DQ this out, and it's removed from most of the sales execution reporting, pipeline reports, and all of that. But it is something that we would use, especially for the AE to SDR handoff.
Yeah, there's a follow-up here on, do you keep stage 0 out of the forecast? It just depends. If you're forecasting what's going to close this quarter, you probably don't even start your forecast until stage 3 on that report. If marketing's looking at what campaigns are driving traction that are leading to our quarterly opportunity and pipeline goal, you're probably only looking at stage 0, 1, and 2 because you're worried about that first wave. If you're looking at a business overall, from marketing through sales, I would do stage 0 through 1. If you're looking at just your SDR metrics, you probably just focus on the 0 to 1. So it just depends on what decisions you're trying to make. But it's almost always when you're looking at the SDR and marketing team is when you would focus on what's happening and the breakdown of that, the meeting stats that you're collecting. Typically, you can make requirement fields for an SDR, make it part of their process to do so.
And the follow-on point here around like, hey, do you do this through the opportunity stages? Like it could get noisy if you're using on an activity or event. And I think the answer to this is back to what Scott was saying. It depends a little bit. I can speak from experience as I said, a solutions engineering leader, like knowing that the SE time was effectively spent when they're meeting with people, being able to inspect Salesforce and go, this isn't following our sales engineering rules of engagement. We don't have a technical counterpart on this call. Why did you tag in the sales engineer? Like that type of reporting was something we ran, but that was maybe unique to our sales process that I was running in a past life.
Yeah, it also helps with SDR career progression because they're so new. They're just learning. Maybe they didn't get as much support as a different wave because their hiring class was bigger or whatever. This way, you can really pinpoint who needs more coaching, because you're going to see the breakdown of the discovery calls that they're providing results for. And then at that point, when you know who needs the coaching based on how their meetings are developing, because you can hide behind just knowing that there's a meeting booked, but you can't when you start to break down the status of those meetings. That's when you go back and look at, well, are they emailing? Are they calling? What's the volume? What's the talk track? How long are the calls? That's when those activity metrics become important when you're talking about how do I need to coach. And the call analytics platforms help with that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this. I'm loving this combo, and I love the questions that are coming in. But Scott, yeah, exactly. Let's talk through
Let's
how
move
we
on.
about this.
So the component of value per meeting, we haven't even talked about the actual metric itself
It's
except for
in the
meeting.
title, and we haven't talked about it yet. Thanks everybody for sticking around the great unveil.
I just love this talk track, and I love this topic. So let's talk about the value per meeting. Right now, traditionally, when you're doing this type of reporting, you say, okay, let's see how much revenue do I need? 500K in revenue. All right. Well, what's the average deal size? Okay, now I take that divided by average deal size. All right, now I know how many deals. All right, what's our average close rate? Now I take that divided by your close rate. Okay, now I know how many deals I need. All right, now I take that divided by my meeting to opportunity or discovery call to opportunity conversion rate. All right, now that's like 3 or 4 formulas that you have to stack against each other to understand what your leading indicator should be. That's just so much work. It's easier to do it that way, because when you have to do that, and then you're talking about different teams with different close rates, with different everything, it just becomes so hard. What if there was one metric where I could just say, this commercial team, I take one formula and find their answer. One formula, find their answer. And that's this. So I take my average deal size, I times it by my win rate, times it by my meeting to opportunity conversion rate, and then I get my value per meeting. That means each one of my discovery calls is worth $2,000 in revenue. When you take these numbers and do it the traditional way, and you look to say, okay, well, is it really right if I need 500K in revenue divided by 2,000 is 250 meetings? When you do that 3-4 equation math that I just explained to you, it's the exact same 250 meetings. But now that you have that, you can say, okay, if I need 500K in revenue from this team, I can just make that division, and here's your goal. 250 meetings divided by the team, now you have your rep goal. So it becomes very easy to find out on a forecasting gauge what you need, and it just eliminates complexity.
And then you can start to work backwards in there of like, okay, cool. As we're talking through this now too, there's an interesting component of, have I set quotas wrong? Right? Because there's physically not enough hours in the day for somebody to have enough discovery calls or initial conversations to be able to get to what their revenue goal would be based on this math.
Exactly. And to double down on that and roll it into the SDR team, this kind of just popped into my head, but how many teams out there have meeting goals for their SDRs? And those meetings are what they're paid on. Well, how do I know if $100 per meeting is worth it? How do I know if $200 meetings is worth it? I've been at companies where it's like $300 a discovery call. Is that high or is it not high? I don't know. Well, now we know. We know that each one of those discovery calls in our funnel, with our deal size, with our conversion metrics, with our budget, we know that is still not, putting us into the red, is putting us into the black. And maybe you could pay a little bit more and still have enough revenue at the end.
Yeah, and just a follow-on question to this, and Scott, I want to make sure that our audience kind of picks up on this point. It does require some amount of understanding and definition of your sales process. You do need a little bit of discipline on what a qualified opportunity looks like, what a successful conversion stage to stage looks like to make this happen. You can't just throw spaghetti up against the wall and hope that the math works. Is that the right kind of underlying foundation to some of this?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because of the questions coming in on, well, is it the first meeting? What meeting is it? How do we avoid death by meeting? Like, I get that. That's awesome. That gets avoided. Not awesome. That's good that you're asking that, is what I meant. But Richard addressed it. You have to have very clearly agreed upon metrics between your requirements between sales and marketing on what actually is a qualified discovery call. What allows a person on the sales dev team, for instance, to say, I can now create a stage 0 op because of this discovery call. What are the requirements? And set those requirements. Is it the right TAM? Is it the right ICP? Is it the right company size? Is it the right intent signals? Do they have the right engagement? And when you have those requirements for what constitutes a discovery call, in a discovery call where you're like, I am confident in creating a conversion rate off of that into an opportunity, then you've won. Then you can do this. Like, you may think, well, 50% is way too high. I would argue, play devil's advocate, you probably need to tighten down your requirements on what you actually call a discovery call. There may be ancillary calls that lead up to that, ancillary email strings that lead up to that, that's fine, but you should make sure that when it actually gets entered in as stage 0 in your opportunity, in your CRM, that is very clearly defined and there's no questions.
And this is something too where we've spent, and this goes above and beyond just the conversations we've had with Scott and the team at Kronologic, but we've done a lot of programming around like defining your ideal customer profile, using that, and being really disciplined, because you don't have infinite time for your teams. Because to Scott's point, if it's maybe a 2% conversion rate there, I mean, you're spending an inordinate amount of time, maybe spending time talking to the wrong people. Maybe there's a way you can tighten that further up, or market differently, or run discovery calls differently. Let your data lead you to the right answer there.
Exactly. And you talked about the marketing thing, the marketing conversion. So let's go to that.
Yeah.
This is, I'm a marketer, so I got to throw this in there, even though it's Modern Sales Pros. There may be some marketers here, or maybe some sales leaders who are tied closely to their demand gen teams and can provide some of this information. But let's just take a hypothetical scenario using some of the data from that value per meeting slide we just had. If you had, in any given time frame, whatever time frame makes sense for 2,000 leads for your business, maybe it's per campaign, maybe it's per quarter, I don't know, but the qualified MQLs, what constitutes actually a person who would, in the right scenario, purchase your solution? A standard across all conversion rates, from events to meetings to webinars to content downloads, whatever. We're typically seeing best in class, like 6%, like the standard that everyone's been using forever is 3 to 3.5%. I just threw in their 4% conversion rate on qualified lead to discovery call. When you get that number, you subtract it from the leads you're bringing in, because those were converted. Those are great. Take those out. Those are going to turn into pipeline, hopefully. Well, now you'd say, all right, that leaves 1,920. Times that by your value per meeting. If in a perfect world, every single one of those turned into a meeting, there's a potential of $3.8 million. You're like, well, that's kind of silly, because there's no way you can have a 100% conversion rate. That's just dumb. But what that does is it gives you your number, the actual number for the pipeline that is available in your funnel from those leads. So now I can say as a marketer, all right, as a demand gen person who's been doing this a while, like I said, I always focus on the conversion rates first, as long as a quick health check on your leads looks good. Let's just say your best practices are good on leads. So now I can say with every 1% increase in conversion rate, it's going to equal, and you can measure yourself on this to see if it's true, 20 discovery calls, 200K in pipeline, that equals 40K in revenue. With every increase in conversion rate. One of the main things that people are like, why are you increasing your conversion rate? That we don't know. That doesn't tell you anything. I can look at a number and say 2,000 is bigger than 1,000 leads, and I can say that this many leads, like they're in the wrong mindset. That a demand gen person's thinking of the percentages. So where I look at is, this is a value per meeting. This is the metric that you can use to see what is my potential in an investment of X that I think will give me a 2% conversion rate. Or you can even stick it to your vendor. Stick it to your vendor and say, because we do this on our sales side, we say, what's your conversion rate today? Someone did an ABM program that's only converting at 2%. They're figuring 1 to 2%. They're trying to figure out what's going on and how it can get better. And we said, I think we could increase. We said we can increase it like 2 or 3% or whatever in your conversion rates. We actually ended up increasing it by 5x. So 1% to 5% conversion rate, and the meeting math got us to that revenue number, and their revenue number reflected this. So all of a sudden you become much more powerful with your entire data set.
Well, and I think the other part about this too, this is a little bit of a different approach. I think, Scott, to your point, a lot of folks look at this from like, how many leads do I need to make that happen, and just kind of do some averages. This is a more sophisticated way to look at it. But back to that kind of discipline, being disciplined about when and how we create things. Jeff Mitchell's got a question in Q&A. I think it's an interesting one. And Jeff, the answer here is a lot of times it depends. But Scott, Jeff's question is, what are your SDR requirements for a qualified converted lead that leads into a discovery call here? How do you train your the sales development folks that you've worked with, or any best practices that you have on them?
Yeah, so this is always really hard. And it's because, and I've ran teams, built them myself, and supported teams that the sales team ran of, just for context, of 2 SDRs to up to 20 SDRs. And here's the problem, is the AE is the wild card. Marketing and sales leadership say, this is what it is. SDRs are green, they don't know any better. They're like, all right, this is what it is. And they're bonused on the what this is, as far as a qualified stage 0 discovery call. The AE, who they're aligned to or they support, or the team of AEs will say, nah, for me, that's not what it is. Or they say, you know what, I'm awesome. I'm a rock star. Send me stuff that's way less qualified than that and I'll convert them. Don't you worry, send them over. And then the SDR is sitting here, and if you're aligned to a team or just to a couple of people, you're not hitting your number. And it's because your SDR or your AE is telling you, no, 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 no. Or they're saying, bring in the volume, bring in the volume. And then the SDR leader is like, what are you doing? Tell me why you're doing this again. And so I think it's really important here in doing that is to make sure that the AEs are bought in on that. And the AEs know that they're off the cuff, I'm a good rep, or off the cuff, I need it to be more qualified, is affecting the paycheck and supporting the family of that SDR. You know, like that it's that much, it's that intense, and they're not seeing it because they're not involved in that discussion. They're not involved in the comp discussion that the marketing and sales leaders have on how to measure that out. And they're not involved in, you know, the ROI calculations that are made, that the marketing and sales leadership teams are going into and deep diving. Everyone's intimately involved in that process. And then the AE comes in and says, nah, I don't know. So I think that making sure that everyone is involved in that process is going to make that successful.
I can't stress that enough. We said this before, right? The discipline, and it does impact people at a real level. Assuming organizations are well aligned there, and assuming everybody's actually playing by the same rules. Anything that you've seen, any trends that you've seen in terms of when to flip that bit where it goes from just being a lead to a qualified opportunity? Ban, MedPick, I think that's we hear MedPick a lot in MSP, but it kind of depends on your organization, right?
Yep. Early on, it was always banned. And then all these other competitors came in because that's now a solution that you can sell, right? So everything from Medic to just using a challenger sale to customer-centric selling. Honestly, I have seen a variety of processes work as long as the entire company is bought in on it, from the CEO to the sales leadership to the mid managers to the reps. As long as everybody is in line with one thing, it honestly doesn't matter what it is, in my view, because it's not the process, in my view, that's one that's better than another, because they all are pretty good.
Yep.
And you have the characteristics of your company that make it tailored to your solution. But if it's not standardized and you have rogue sales leaders, or you have rogue sales, or you're following this process that the leadership isn't aligned with and supporting, you now can't say, oh, well, this part of the funnel is broken, so let's look at that process. Let's look at why things don't move from 3 to 4, why things don't move from 1 to 2, and change something in there. Because if it's not standard and everyone's bought in on it all the way through, there's just so many variables and wild cards, it's impossible to fix. So you have this philosophy you're using, but everyone's using it differently, and some people care, some people don't, and you will literally be in this perpetual broken state forever.
The discipline and the alignment, and it almost becomes this sales enablement and philosophical discussion around how to make that rock and roll. But
Yep.
To Scott's point, be consistent.
Yep. So really quick, in our dashboard, here's what it looks like. But I've made dashboards that look exactly like this in Salesforce before, where you see how many meetings are being booked from the leads that the qualified leads that you're processing, so that you can see your conversion rate for teams, lead sources, overall, by date range, whatever. You get to see at the bottom here the forecast of how many meetings are proposed and how many are booked. Like I said, in Salesforce, you don't have to have our software. You can create a bar graph with segments on those graphs by team, by lead source, by whatever, all the way out. And one cool thing about this too is that you can, I'll get into that later actually, I'll get to it right here, which is the concluding slide of like our takeaways, the power slide, if you will. So forecasting benefits of the media metric, you're no longer defending the ebbs and flows of lead volume from the marketing side. You can adjust your campaigns as you need, because you're going to see what's working, what's not really early and right away. And if you're not beholden to some lead count, you are then enabled to make the bold moves you need to make, because you know the end result is going to be the same. You don't have to go back and say, well, let me run this other campaign just so I can like fluff my numbers up to what the goal is. And you throw a bunch of garbage in so you can actually concentrate on what you know is working. Never been there before. Anyway, the SDR BDRs, there's no more questioning if your movement is work, because you're measured off of not your activity, but your end result. You can see if you're going to drive your number or not up to a month in many cases at a time. And you can adjust the booking of meetings to align with your end of month crunches. That kind of goes to that bottom part of the sales line, where the problem a lot of times organizations have too on the sales to AE handoff is, you would think that it doesn't matter where an SDR is in their quarter. They're just qualifying people that are ready. And over law of averages, there's always going to be the same amount of people who are ready to buy at any given time. So their work is always consistent. Nope. SDRs have an end of month and end of quarter crunch, just like AEs. It's weird, but it's reality. And so what happens is you get a huge influx of brand new opportunities to be worked in the last month of the quarter. For the last month of the quarter, the AEs have blocked out their net new deal radar, and they're focused only on their closing deals. So maybe, I've never seen this happen. I'm just proposing it out there to see if this is something that should happen. If and when we ever get a SDR team, I'll absolutely bring this up right away. But why not have the last month of your SDR's quarter? Because this really depends just on their goals and when they get paid out. It has nothing to do with the board report on when the SDRs are bonused, but bonus them in the first month, or have their last month be the first month of the AE. That way, when the AEs are focused on net new deals, that's when the SDR does this opportunity dump on them to hit their number. I didn't come up with that, actually. It was someone else that I know, David Delaney, who's also a great thought leader. He came up with that in a discussion I had with him. So I'll give him the credit, but I thought it was a fantastic idea. The AE, yeah, sorry, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna say, love David, love Penbound. They've been on before, so totally safe shout out there, Scott.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I held back and I thought, oh, he'll be okay with it.
Let it out.
I love MSP, and you guys have been fantastic for us. So, but give credit where credit's due, and that was great. The other thing is, the AEs will now know if they need to start self-sourcing. This seems weird for me to say, because why would a marketing person say an AE should start self-sourcing over here? It's because I am only as successful as my SDRs are. Marketing may be the only revenue-based role that I literally have limited control over how much pipeline gets driven, because I am beholden to the success of the SDR on that phone call. So if we have a brand new batch of SDRs and an SDR just isn't figuring it out and they need a little bit more ramp time, well, guess who suffers? The leads going to that person or from that spend, and the AE on the other end. So if you're tracking it like this and you sort it by SDR on that forecasting timeline I showed that you can build out in your CRM, now an AE can just say, oh, Junior's coming along, but not fast enough. I can't rely on a third of my pipeline coming from them anymore. So I can see that at the beginning of the last month of my quarter, I need to start self-prospecting, so that when I go to my end of quarter review and they say, well, that's great, you hit your closing number, what's your pipeline look like for next number? You don't have to say, well, I was paired up with Junior and they're still ramping. Like, you no longer have to do that. You can say, well, so-and-so is coming along and supporting them and helping them. But because I saw that they were ramping pretty hard still, I just went and self-sourced XYZ. And then you have a more constructive conversation.
There's a lot on that last point. I think Trish, the esteemed Trish Bertuzzi talks about how SDRs actually have a really difficult job, because that may be the first and sometimes only time that a real live human is talking to another real live human about your product, and they've got they're junior in their career. I mean, think about 22, 23, figuring out a lot about life in some instances, but also they're talking about maybe a very complex product and solution to somebody who knows their stuff. Really tricky job. The other part I would say on this too, just that idea of the offset. This is really interesting as well from a capacity planning standpoint on the back half of the equation, right? We spent 99% of our time here talking about the top half of the top part of the initial parts of the flywheel, the top parts of the funnel. But there's a downstream knock on. If the AEs always close deals the last week of the quarter, and there's an implementation team, what's really busy for them? The first week of the next quarter. So you can look at this kind of offset idea. I know it's a little bit project managing, and it may melt a few brains in here, but it is something where you can look at this offset idea really through the entire season of the first time somebody interacts with you, really all the way until they're a strong advocate for your brand, and look at it from a capacity standpoint. Do we have enough humans to deliver what we need to?
Yep.
I feel like I had like 3 shots of espresso in this conversation, Scott. This was really fun. We've got time for maybe one more question here before we wind down here. Let's see if anybody's got one. All right. Well, Scott.
There's one thing real quick, that this is a very hard thing to capture. I would say I've experienced a little bit of contrary. So say your sales and marketing teams are aligned on definitions, and you can get to that point. I actually did this process 2 companies ago, so almost 5 years ago, as a miniature skunkworks project within me, the head of demand gen and the director of sales development, just to see if it was better than what we were doing. And I pulled a little demand gen budget aside and bought $1,000 worth of Amazon gift cards so that we could do some side spiffing on enhancing this process. And SDRs love Amazon gift cards. And it ended up being very successful. And we restructured their team and their comp and how we spiffed based on it, off of our learnings within that organization. And the business went along with it because we kind of did a 1-2 month experiment with it. So I think that because it's data that the SDR team and the marketing team are in control of, you can run kind of like a skunkworks project against it just to see how it compares to what you're doing today.
And I think the other part on this too, I mean, there's a lot of tools and technology out there that is helping, with the like Salesforce complianceness, or sorry, CRM complianceness. It's not like 10 years ago. Even just interacting with Salesforce is much better. So I think that's another tailwind in the favor of being able to look at more of an advanced metric, like something like value per meeting and some of the splits that Scott was talking about.
Yep.
Here.
Hence the spiff. Like if your Salesforce admin team is like, I'm not making X and Y fields in the CRM. I'm not making those ones required at any stage. I'm not making a stage 0. Just do it with whatever controls you do have, and and spiff them that way instead of like forcing them by having a Salesforce save requirement. Then they'll be more excited about the change in the first place, and they'll be willing to do, in worst case scenario, a spreadsheet component. But let's hope you could do it somewhere within the confines of the CRM.
I love it, Scott. This was a whole heck of a lot of fun. Really enjoyed having you on here, Scott. And I wanted to thank you and thank Kronologic again for being such a great partner of Modern Sales Pros. Scott, on behalf of the team behind the scenes, our audience here today, and everybody watching in the future on YouTube, I wanted to thank you and wish you a safe and wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.